Hey everyone. So I told you in class that I would do a video in case you wanted to hear me walk through this and hear what's more important. You had the paper note guide that you could have picked up in class, but you're welcome to write on just whatever you normally write on. If you want a notebook for forensic science, that is fine with me too. First of all, we want to know what is forensic science. The most basic term, it's just applying science to the criminal justice system, and therefore it depends on the scientist's ability to be accurate and objective with the information. It's also kind of hard to define because it includes so many areas of science, everything from voice analysis to document analysis, DNA, to trace evidence, to chemistry. So, where did this all start? Maybe you've heard of forensics as a debate team, and you're like, how does that relate to forensic science? So, they both actually have the same root word, one in Rome Latin, forensis. So, when they charge someone, they would do a case before the public and they would argue it. So, it would be a debate. And it was basically who had the best story because what type of evidence would they have had at the time? And then the individual with the best argument would have the more positive outcome. Now we have a bunch of the father ofs. So you want to learn a little bit about each of these, and it's going to help you with the timeline too. So the timeline that I said would talk about soon, this will help you put information on that timeline. So first of all, we have Matthew Orfila, 1787 to 1853. He's known as the father of toxicology. So he's the first one to write about how to detect poisons and what you see in the animal when you poison an animal with whatever it is. We have Alfonso Bertillon. He's considered the father of anthropometry. And so this was when you would measure people. So and some of it isn't necessarily very accurate. Like they thought that you could have a more criminal body, but we can still apply some of that today. So like how tall they are, how long they are in the body, the shape of the head we don't do anymore. So some of these where they're showing the shape of the head really isn't what we do today. But foot size, we can apply that to that person couldn't possibly have worn those shoes. They're way too small. Francis Galton, father of fingerprinting. So he realized that fingerprints were individual, and it still today is the best way to prove someone's been somewhere. DNA can be identical, if you have identical twins, or if someone did a bone marrow transplant, their blood may be different than something else, but the fingerprint is 100% individual as far as we have ever been able to tell. Leon Latz, father of bloodstain identification. So he actually developed the procedure for determining the blood type, even of of the dried blood. And so that's useful, of course, before we had DNA fingerprinting because that was all we had. And that would help you rule out people. I'm B positive. O negative blood was left at the scene. It can't be me. Calvin Goddard, father of ballistics. He developed the technique to examine bullets, so looking under a microscope to be able to tell which bullets were fired from which gun. That's where you have to do a test firing, so you have the example that came from that gun. You compare it to the casings that were left behind. Albert Osborne, father of documents. So the stuff he worked on was how can you tell if something's counterfeit, handwriting analysis, that type of analysis. Walter McCrone, father of microscopic forensics. So he developed and applied things like this fiber matches the fiber that was left behind at the crime scene. So anything where you're looking under the microscope, we're thinking of Walter McCrone. Hans Gross, father of forensic publications. So he kind of pulled things together. Edmund Locard, father of the crime lab. So he started the first actual crime lab, and eventually it became the Institute of Criminalistics in France. And the most important thing to know about Edmund Locard is his Locard's exchange principle. So simply put, Locard's exchange principle, every contact leaves a trace. So if a criminal was somewhere, they either left something behind, or that criminal is carrying particles from the crime scene with them. And today, especially when we're talking about touch DNA type stuff, this is so very true, that if you cannot put that person at the crime scene, then you don't have a connection. J. Edgar Hoover created the FBI in the 1930s. That includes Prohibition, the Great Depression, World War II, all the way through the Cold War and the Vietnam War. He organized the National Laboratory for all law enforcement agencies because some places are really small. Most states have their own forensic services. Indiana has theirs in Indianapolis. Yes, he's controversial because they did illegal. Today you have to have a cause to do wiretaps. There was no term. 48 years is an extremely long time. So we now have the FBI directors limited to 10-year terms. And now we're in authors. Edgar Allan Poe is considered the father of detective fiction. He started writing detective fiction in the mid-1800s. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said that Poe was a model for all time. If you want more things about Poe, there's a good website. Then Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, hopefully you recognize him as Sherlock Holmes author. He was writing the Sherlock Holmes stuff in the late 1800s. So he obviously read Edgar Allan Poe first because he had the quote. And that is not the right work because that's Agatha Christie. I will fix that before too long. But anyway, I do have a website for Sherlock Holmes. I'll get that in there. And then Agatha Christie, she was writing about the same time as Doyle. And you may recognize her characters as Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. And so those guys are connected only in the sense that if you're wanting to read stuff that's traditional crime lab forensic type stuff, they are excellent sources. And you probably know that there's videos and movies and TV shows based on their characters out there if you are not much of a reader. And that is all we have for the very introduction to the history of forensics. And then I will be doing the forensic science of the criminal justice system very shortly.